to the triangle, square, circle menu.
Oh, this one. Oh,
Welcome.
yeah.
I think we're live. Thanks for joining, everybody. August, talking about Loki. I didn't really prep an intro. Just kind of winging this.
Like, subscribe, Ed.
Yeah, don't forget to smash that like button if you're watching this on YouTube, and subscribe and leave a comment. The comment really helps our algorithm sorting. Engage with the channel. It's important. That's how we make money. YouTube.
Don't you need a bass guitar to pull that one?
Yeah, I used to have one. I don't have anything. Anyway,
just for the record, Gotham, I have a very urgent appointment with a fire pit in the sunshine. So we won't make the full call.
Yeah, let's get into it. If anybody wants to add anything to the agenda to talk about, please do. Happy to talk about anything. Otherwise, we're going to dig into 2.3, which will be out tomorrow, if all goes well for me today and tomorrow. The latest probably Monday, but it should be out tomorrow. I'm pretty confident that will go smoothly. So we've talked about this a little bit in previous, actually probably the last several months. 2.3 has been a little bit slower than our usual slowness in releases, but there's good news. There's lots of really, really cool stuff. We've talked about the pattern parser a bit before. I think I can. Am I sharing my screen or am I? No, I'm not. Let me do that.
No, we see your face, but
let me do this.
They're boring,
So that way, when I click through to things. So pattern parsing allows you to take somewhat slightly structured log lines, like Apache common log format, where things are in a known position are usually delimited by something like a space, but it isn't necessarily consistent enough or structured enough to use like a JSON log format type parser. And pattern parser is really nice because it's much faster. It actually ends up being faster than JSON and faster than regex. Regex is the slowest of Loki's parsers. Log format would be let's go from fastest to slowest. It should be the pattern parser is the fastest. Log format and JSON are very, very close. We kind of take turns trading them back and forth as we improve them. And regex being the sort of least fun to write and slowest to use. So if you have regex filters that you're using, you might be able to replace those with these pattern matching, which is pretty straightforward. You use greater than, less than symbols to identify a thing. And if you don't care about it, you can put an underscore in there. That just tells Loki that it's a token, but we're not really going to extract it as a label. And then you match the sort of white space or characters that exist statically within the line to separate between the tokens, and use the name in between those open or greater than and less than symbols to extract a label. So check that out tomorrow. Let's see, custom retention. That's been a hot topic for a long time. So Loki's retention has always been left as an exercise to the object store implementation. Aside from the file system table manager would do some deletes for you. But it's always just been a big hammer. Everything gets deleted at or whatever date or whatever sort of wild rules that you would set up for object stores. So now in 2.3, Loki will let you configure, let's find a config example here. We'll let you configure custom retention on a stream selector basis. Here we go. This is what I'm looking for. So you can say on a given stream to specify a label selector, how long you want retention to be, hours, days, weeks, months, years, if you'd like. There's no real penalty for very long-term retention in Loki because we just ship it all off to an object store and let it hang out. So the implementation, basically the compactor component. So one caveat: this does only work with the BoltDB shipper index type. Really, I would say, putting no effort into the maintenance of the separate index types like Cassandra or DynamoDB. I mean, not to say we won't fix bugs or things, but we're not really devoting our effort into changing or improving those, and as such, most new features won't probably be ported to them at all. So if you haven't moved to BoltDB shipper, I recommend it. And yeah, with that, so the compactor component, which is basically an index compactor for BoltDB shipper, is now taking charge of scanning the index. So when you submit a retention thing, it will go through at some interval, I don't remember, and scan and mark things for deletion. Separate processes then come through and will delete the chunks from any storage type at this point now. So you can and probably should remove your object store retention rules, like your TTLs on things, and let Loki handle it for you. We are flagging this as a beta feature. Well, technically says experimental. We're using it. We've been using it, but we don't have, as much time on this as to the point where we want to make sure that we've worked out all the bugs. But I would say that you needn't to be overly concerned. I would recommend, and we do this as well, as just a general rule of caution and good advice, especially on index files, it's not a bad idea to enable object versioning in an object store. You can do this on chunks too. It helps protect you against, accidental configs, and might protect you against a bug, but not as a bad practice. And generally you can configure it so it doesn't add a significant amount of cost. You really only want to keep like one previous version, just in case something got deleted or mangled that you care about. All right. Anything I missed, fellow Loki folks, on the retention?
Sounds
part of
good.
this? Nice. Deletes is kind of goes hand in hand. We implemented both of these at the same time, largely to be able to do compliance related requests. So we've been sort of cleverly managing GDPR requests by only having 30 days retention. So GDPR basically allows you to take 30 days to complete a request. So by opening that window for us and our purposes and our hosted purposes for storing longer, we needed a way to do deletes on request. It is currently in that sort of scope that we've implemented it, whereas you submit a delete request and it goes into a queue, and then 24 hours later it will be processed from that queue and the logs will be deleted. So it is not like up to the second type deletion. It is possible to do that. We've actually had some of the code in place for it. It gets a bit tricky because there's several caching layers within Loki, and you end up having to do like some query time filtering and cache eviction and things. So we just opted to not introduce that complexity yet. It could be added if up to the second, and up to the millisecond type deletes are important. I don't know where you can go comment on that. I don't know, maybe create an issue if there's not one. But yes, there is a way to do deletes now from Loki, and that would be on a stream level. So you can't do like a filter expression. It would basically say, like, with this label selector and this time range, I would like to delete all of the logs. Let's talk about recording rules. Alerting rules went into Loki quite some time ago, actually, maybe almost a year ago at this point. In a very, very close and very similar fashion, recording rules, much like alerting rules, will take a query and sort of just execute it against live data. And in an alerting sense, it then generates an alert if conditions are met. And in a recording rule case, it does something really fun with Loki, where you can take a query executed against your logs and turn it into metrics, and then remote write that to any Prometheus remote write compatible endpoint. So you can, as of Prometheus 2.20 something within the last 2 releases, there's a flag that actually allows Prometheus to accept remote write pushes. So you could send from Loki to Prometheus, or Thanos, Cortex, any of the other sort of big remote write backends. So now you can set up some automatic recording rules to turn your logs into metrics. I'll pause for a minute if anybody has any questions. I feel like I'm stalling for time because we're going to be done. And
no worries. That one's really exciting, I think. It really helps bridge the gap between using Loki as a metric source in an ad hoc fashion and actually like integrating it into a kind of like existing pipeline where you have Prometheus or some Prometheus compatible backend. And so we do this internally for things like all sorts of per tenant read path like query metrics that we ultimately generate from logs themselves. And then we write them into metrics back into Cortex in our case, but it could be anything. And it helps us then kind of like integrate that into our existing Prometheus data sources. And it's a nice tool to have.
Also very handy for applications that you can't directly instrument with metrics and you want to, so, you know, depending on your Loki install, like our cloud offering with 30-day retention, and will now support longer retention, you could, you know, take your application that doesn't allow instrumentation with metrics, you know, write alerting or recording rules to then send to metric store, which has like 12 or 13 months retention. So it's another way to get better sort of metrics visibility out of an application that might not have the ability to do that directly.
It's the write your exporters in Loki approach.
Yeah. I mean, our end goal is that there just will be Loki, right? Like that's where we're heading here. So yeah, don't tell anybody. Ingester query sharding is one of my favorite things. And there's a couple things about these next two that are important. They only apply to people that have a Loki setup, which is using a query front end. The query front end is what actually creates the smaller queries based on splits and shards. The initial sharding implementation that Owen did, which is how Loki has been as fast as it's been, stopped just shy of the ingester. We basically said at the time, like, you know, there's been enough complexity and enough like we had to put a milestone somewhere, and it's been a while, and luckily we were able to kind of circle back around finally to revisit that last bit of being able to shard queries that go to the ingesters. And this matters a lot when you have high volume log streams. So you're typically flushing, you know, if you're flushing, you know, chunks every few seconds or few minutes, if you have log streams that are generating, you know, a few 100K or even a megabyte a second, it's been somewhat painful to query those because the only parallelization you get on those is the split by. So, you know, kind of at best, we tend to run like a 15-minute split by interval. I think we've actually increased that to 30 minutes because of this now. So you would only be able to split a query into, you know, 15-minute chunks, and that could mean, you know, a single query or ingester, I guess, but query are mainly doing an entire 15-minute chunk that could have been maybe gigabytes and gigabytes of log data. So there was no way to really do more parallelization until this was added. So now that can be split again by our sharding factor in the index of 16. So, you know, it's mostly impactful for high volume log streams, but in those cases, it's you know, very, very, very nice.
I think this is really cool for kind of two reasons. One being that recent data tends to be the data we care about the most. And historically, as Ed mentioned, this was something that we could not take advantage of the same parallelization, same optimizations. And now this enables us to do so. And the other part is that this hasn't been sent to storage yet, so it's actually readily accessible. And so that means that we actually are seeing, you know, benefits beyond what we saw in the sharding implementation that touches storage, because we also get to filter out some bits that would require us to pull data from storage, and so ultimately we get to see some pretty impressive numbers coming out of there. You really will start to see benefits here once you hit a certain scale. I would probably, as like a general rule of thumb, probably not enable sharding at all unless you have maybe a minimum of 10 queries running, but your mileage may vary.
Yeah, that's the the guidance on our part here is a little bit shallow, or maybe another way to say that isn't really exist well at all. But there's a couple of things that play with parallelization, like Owen said. So having the ability to do the querying is the one part, and two is making sure you have the resources. So making sure that you have, so in the front end worker config, there's a section called parallelism, and that will configure how much one individual querier. We tend to map that to CPU cores. And then there's boy, I can't remember it off my head. There's a front end config that will configure how much parallelism is allowed to be done at once. So there's some trade-offs here. You can make that number really big, but on certain queries, it would end up in executing a massive amount of querying information that isn't used. So log queries that only return 1,000 lines. And, if you tell it, do you want to do, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 query, what do we call those little query execution units in parallel? Like, you'll end up querying a ton of data that you don't need because you might find 1,000 log lines in the first result. So, but yes, query front end, make sure you have enough querying capacity for what your configs are, and enjoy that one. And this is also, I think this one is, to me, the instant query parallelization is more exciting in some ways, because this is something that Prometheus can't do. So one unique advantage of Loki counting events is we don't have a concept of counter resets. So in like Cortex, for example, we can't parallelize instant queries because you need to look at all of the data from the view of one querier to look for counter resets to be able to properly increment that counter. In Loki, we don't have that concept. We just count events, which means it's actually pretty easy for us to just break that work up. So I don't know that I have an example of like where this would really, one versus the other. But like I said, in our quest for global domination, +1 to Loki here, because instant query parallelization can be really, really handy. Especially for certain types of queries like top K queries, where you want to look at the top K over a period of time. Like you can do that now. Range query top Ks always give weird results, and if you're familiar with this, you already know why. But if you're not, like, a range query is basically just a bunch of instant queries executed at a step, and each one of those executions will produce its own separate top K, and then that result gets merged, and you ask for a top 10, and you might get back like 30 results. So using an instant query guarantees you get back only 10 results, but that's historically been slow because one query has to go do all of the work, but not anymore. So now that gets splitted and sharded, based on the same configs that you have for your, like query range type queries. Super cool.
Yeah. This is also another bit that we have had kind of lying around for a while, and we didn't enable a lot of the optimizations for instant queries. We didn't fully wire it up because a lot of the initial bits that we were really worried about were range queries executing really slowly. So there's kind of a trend here of, the recent past X months where we're kind of going back and addressing some of these relatively, maybe not low-hanging fruit, but things that we were aware of, and really kind of, connecting all the dots there.
And that's largely in part because people like Loki and the product is growing. And as a result, we've been able to grow the team. So Callum is a recent joiner. Karsten did the instant query, a recent joiner. And I think we have, 6 people full-time for Loki now, which is fantastic. My time is now split more into doing management stuff. So, and in, talking until you get tired of hearing me talk. So that's very exciting. So very excited to see growth and improved support for Loki, because that does let us go back through to close the loop on a lot of this fun stuff, right? Like, there's a lot of ways that we can continue to make Loki way, way cooler. In fact, I added up 280 PRs in the release between 2.2.1 and 2.3. So just a fantastic amount of work has gone into that release. This is the sort of most exciting major features, but numerous improvements for performance on all of our parsers, in Loki in general in terms of memory and CPU consumption. Granted that enabling more splitting and sharding results in more CPU usage and faster results, but very, very excited. And that's the last one that I had on that. So anybody have any questions on features or 2.3? Anyone want to take any bets on when 2.4 will be released? Over under on 6 months?
Under this time, please.
Yeah. So 2.4, I'll segue, Owen, to you to talk about out of order, because 2.4 will be the first release to have what will likely be beta still version of Loki supporting out of order rights. Sorry, it's not going to make it into 2.3.
Yeah, so sorry to everyone that's following along the out of order issue where I said I thought it would be experimental in 2.3 this morning.
Did you? Oh.
Yeah. And then quickly realized that we were cutting our release from a different point than I thought we were. But yes, so the past few months, or a month, I guess not even that long, I've been sequestered away a lot working on out of ordering, which is something that Ed and I started putting together about a year ago. And it will not entirely eliminate the ordering constraint in Loki, but what it will do is we'll kind of give you a variable validity window, which should be way more than enough for 99% of the cases where we see. So this should really help people who are using non-Promtail based agents, people who want to ingest things like, for instance, high cardinality or ephemeral data into Loki. So trying to ingest AWS Lambda logs or load balancers, this sort of thing. Historically, you kind of had to fight between label cardinality and the ordering constraint until you'd be incentivized to do things like create more labels to get outside of the ordering constraint, or to do things like ingestion timestamping, where you'd actually overwrite the timestamp of a log that was reported by a subsidiary service. Those are things which we realize are not ideal. And so what this work does ultimately is allows the ingesters, the component which does a lot of the heavy lifting during writes, to accept logs for a variable period of time, and then it will reorder them before flushing to storage. And so this kind of allows the rest of the system to behave as normal, and it was a way for us to kind of get an isolated change that really gives us an outsized benefit in terms of new functionality. So we're very excited about it. I'm continuing to work on it along with Callum, and we've now run about a week-long experiment in one of our clusters, which looks very promising, and we're going to start rolling it out across all of our internal clusters imminently. So, yeah, 2.4 will probably be, what is it, beta?
I got a question, Owen. Are there any performance impacts from supporting out-of-order rights?
So I should be able to answer this with more clarity in the future once we have run some more significant tests. However, a lot of this is designed from the ground up to not to only incur costs when needed. So if you continue to ingest the bulk of your logs in order, for instance, you should see almost very negligible, if any, performance changes. We haven't found any yet at all in that regard. We're going to be kind of monitoring this, as I said, and so I'm sure something will pop up. But the things I'm currently looking out for are increased memory usage in the ingesters is the big one, but should have some more information later.
Figure out how to write. So the constraint on what data Loki will accept out of order, I think, is an interesting one that was a bit of a trade-off on a few things, but I'm really happy with this trade-off because Loki will still happily accept old data. So you can have a new machine spin up, or you could sort of backload old data, and that works fine. The restraint really, or the constraint really, is whatever the most recent timestamp for a stream is minus, I think it's the max chunk age is the actual.
Yeah, that's the configuration that we use to parameterize.
So what you can't do is write data from now and then send data from like yesterday into the same stream at the same time. But you can write data that's timestamped now minus, say, 2 hours or 3 hours, which is a typical max chunk age. And all of that can be accepted and ordered and stored. So I think this covers, generally like 99% of the use cases that people really care about ordering, which is some amount of jitter or, different systems sending data from the same stream. And that's it. So I think that's the last major feature for Loki. I think we're probably done. Don't remember anyone requesting any other major features. But look for that in 2.4. I actually think we will try to do let me say like a month's time. I don't think that we're gonna, because I do want to get this out into the hands of folks to get the experience of community folks. If you're very eager to do this, what's the K56 tag? You can run that one.
Yeah, there's a bunch of branches. K number, the letter K followed by a number, which roughly follow a lot of the internal releases we cut inside at Grafana. And they are a more bleeding edge way to deploy Loki that is not quite from the tip of the main branch.
I'm looking.
Yeah, K56 does not.
Oh no, it doesn't. All right, so there isn't one yet.
I found that out like an hour ago.
Yeah, I looked at it too earlier. It was branched just prior to merging that commit. So there is no K release yet. So K57 will be the first, or K58. We've talked about the K releases before. There's a bit of a caveat emptor here because if we find bugs as we promote things through the process, we will re-release and essentially redeploy. And every once in a while, we abandon them because of timing and whatnot with being able to get stuff through. So generally speaking, the most recent K release is maybe not the one you want, like stay one back, but we continue to sort of automate that process. So there's, now more than ever, there's generally good stability in the K releases, specifically the one less than the most recent one. All right.
And so I checked. I'm doing that next week, and so we should cut it first few days of next week.
I'm supposed to do K57 this week, and what day is today? Thursday.
I wasn't going to call you out, but
but
yeah, that's how I found out.
Or do you want K57? I'll leave that. You get one release a week. Okay. Thanks, Owen. That's super cool. I'm not going to go through all the lists. I just wanted to copy it up in here because Grafana 8.1 was released just about an hour and a half ago. And I think all of this stuff made it in there. So a lot of really awesome stuff. Ivana's not here. She talked about it last week. So go check out the recording or last month rather. So lots of fun stuff came into fixes and improvements into Grafana 8.1. So pair that up with 2.3 tomorrow and should be pretty exciting. That's it. That's the end of the stuff I got.
Let's anyone have anything they want to talk about, questions, that sort of thing?
All great stuff, guys.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for joining, Zach, man. You're our #1 fan.
Woo!
We love you. Sorry, other Zach Swanson. Zach Leslie is new to Grafana, but he's on the Tempo squad, so he's just kind of... So welcome, Zach Leslie and Zach Swanson, #1 Loki fan. Mm. If we had Loki shirts, man, I'd send you one, but...
That's nice.
But I think that's probably another thing that I'm bad at as a team lead. No Loki swag.
I got you guys will be happy to hear I got guest blog draft in for your team to look at for the Grafana for Loki and Tempo on Fargate. Finally.
Yeah, I think I looked at that. That was was it posted yet?
No, the draft has been posted for your review.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah, if you can run Loki on Fargate, you can run it anywhere. I
Um,
should probably not have that in the recording.
I will like so for those that have both found this recording and stayed this long. So Jen Vila is on the call. Jen and I. So Jen is the product manager for the parts of Loki that we tend to wrap up in our enterprise stuff. But we've combined our forces, or are combining our forces, with the goal of making the Loki single binary much easier to run, specifically to be able to use it to run in an HA fashion with very minimal configs. The goal here is to embed the complexity of what is now the query front end, index gateway, index read cache, index write cache, chunks cache. What am I missing? Table manager, which we don't use so much anymore, compactor. So Loki as microservices is many, and our goal is to hide a lot of that complexity. So this is primarily targeted for those 1 to maybe 5 terabyte a day type use cases where you want to be able to run Loki with. We will likely have separate read and write path binaries, because that separation, it'll be the same binary. It'd be like what we do now. There'll be a flag that's like, this is a read path or write path, but we want to try to hide as much of that config and complexity as we can inside those binaries, and then you can provision multiple of them to get more performance and support more volume. I'm very, very excited about this, because the real aim here is to close some of that. Like running Loki as a single binary is very easy, but you want to add HA, or you want to get parallelizable queries, and it very quickly becomes a lot more difficult. If you are on Kubernetes and have, the distributed Helm chart that Reinhardt contributed, that makes life way, way easier. We basically want to make it as easy for everyone, especially outside of Kubernetes environments and on VMs and anywhere you might want to run Loki. So
Raspberry Pis, if you're Ed.
Yeah. I put Kubernetes on my Raspberry Pis, though, just because I'm a glutton.
Oh, sorry. Allow me to find a trash can I can vomit in.
Yeah, the I don't know. This is I hope the real goal is to make, there's I think a large portion of people that, fall into that hundreds of gigabytes a day of logs, and maybe you have access to Kubernetes and it's not so bad for you to deal with JSON or Helm, but we want to kind of simplify that too if we can, just fewer moving parts, and take our expertise that we've learned around running Loki and hide that in terms of config and things inside of the binaries. So I have no timeline for that yet, but it is.
The only timeline you can give is kicking it off this week.
Yeah, sometime
how long it will take, we'll figure that out.
Sometime between 2.3 and 3.0. I don't know.
I was like the mythical 3.0.
Yeah. I can pick any number that I want, because there is
careful,
no
you don't want to tie yourself to anything there.
Yeah. It's because I want a Loki release to be exciting. If we did it every week, who would care? Who every month be like, oh, another Loki release, boring. Now everybody's excited. I think I'm excited.
You're good at finding the silver linings.
Is that Jen?
I was just gonna add on and say, I think we're all really excited about this project at Grafana Labs, and it also just kind of makes you chuckle. It's like move to microservices, but now in a way, we're going away from that, at least to support simpler use cases. And I think it just you got to choose what works for you based on your expertise and your deployment architecture, and we think this is going to help a lot of people who might otherwise have kind of felt locked out.
Yep, full circle. It's the way for tech. We're back to mono repos and monoliths. Actually, Loki will always run as a microservice. That's how we will always run it. there will always be advantages to having a microservices deployment, but that always does come with increased complexity. And, I would say it's sort of operational knowledge and things. So, so you'd be able to run, Loki as this multiple smaller binary and add microservices components to it. So it will remain flexible, but we just want to make it way, way easier to get from what is a non-HA single binary into at least HA with some query performance in parallelization and things. And then you can kind of build it out from there.
I think that'll address a lot of the questions that you tend to get in your Slack and on the forum too, because people tend to run the single binary and then they immediately hit the wall of like, I tried to query an hour of data and it falls over.
Yep. Yep. And, or I ran 2 single binaries and I'm using a local file system and I can't get my query results, or I didn't set up a ring, or I didn't set up, a shared, like that kind of stuff is what we're really hoping, to hide the complexity of member lists and the communication that needs to happen. So I think that will be a nice big boost for lots of folks trying to get started with Loki to get to that step 2. All right. Any last thoughts or words?
Since you mentioned memberless, I got a question. Is Tempo, I know, has been fighting like some memberless issues, and are those the same that Loki has, or are they different? And why is there a divergence there?
The memberless implementation is the same between Tempo,
Okay.
Loki, and Cortex. To be honest, we don't run memberless in our clusters. With Loki, we run a single console instance. And there's no real reason for that aside from inertia. So given that Tempo was, the newest, they ventured out on the memberless path, and there's been a number of bugs. All of the bugs I've seen relate to trying to get instances to forget from the ring. And not all of those bugs are fixed. However, I can tell you that we're going to be working on fixing them, because memberless is, still by and large, I think the most requested way. Like, very few people seem keen on wanting to run console or etcd for this. And we in general don't want to have people to have another third party, dependency that they have to set up. So I do feel pretty confident in saying we will work out all those bugs. And we do run Tempo in our clusters now and have for a long time on memberless. So it is, it does work well. But right now it has the neat side effect where you tell it to forget things that are unhealthy and they come back. Like our Tempo clusters have, I think they just decided that they aren't keen on us, choosing when to remove nodes from a cluster. They've taken a life of their own.
Yeah, I mean, I had that with Loki for a while, but it seemed to settle out, so I didn't.
Yeah, there was a lot of changes fixed. Like the initial implementation, the bug was fairly straightforward, where you have to announce something is being forgotten, and that message would have to be propagated. And there were some timing issues, and not enough people propagated that message, so it didn't get to everybody. And the ones that weren't forgotten just communicated it back around again. So that was fixed, and effectively we thought that would have been the last, but turns out there's at least 1 or 2 more forget related bugs that need to be squashed.
Yeah, I mean, another interesting data point there, right, is when Jacob did some of our performance benchmarking on the metric side, he used memberless, and yeah, so he got up to like a ring of like 500 ingesters. And it worked. It was working fine. But I mean, again, that was a load test, right? It's not like we were trying to like kill things and then bring it back. So we wouldn't have necessarily seen, I guess, the things people would see in real life with ingesters getting unhealthy and needing forgotten.
Speaking of unhealthy ingesters, also, Jen, the background noises from wherever you are fantastic. Like,
yes.
I'm not sure if you're on a racetrack or
just wandering around the streets of Ecuador.
Yeah, it's great. Speaking of forgetting unhealthy ingesters, 2.3 will include a flag that lets you auto forget unhealthy ingesters. So a much controversial sort of feature or way of Loki where, you know, things that would leave without exiting properly would stay as unhealthy. It can be enabled to auto forget them now, and especially with the write ahead log, it's probably pretty reasonable to do that, especially if you run into it a lot. But so at least that's an option now for a lot of people. That
well, you should put that on the feature list. That was like one of the first things I ever asked about fixing with Loki. Like, can you just make it forget automatically?
Yeah,
like,
and my answer was always the same. Can you just make your stuff not shut down?
Yeah, you're right. No, it was very contentious. They were like, no, that's working as intended.
I just deflect back to the Cortex issue that was super long, which was like, no, we like it this way. And everybody, yeah, we don't need to dig it up. But the good news is you have a choice now on which path that you'd like to take. I'll just add that in here. Can now auto forget unhealthy. All right. Thanks for joining, everybody. Stay tuned there. I'll probably tweet some stuff. We should have a blog post going out with this tomorrow. We should try to coordinate those. So check the blog, check GitHub, and you'll get the details. I don't anticipate any upgrade. I got to go through and look at that, but I don't think anything's changed in a config standpoint that really requires direct attention. So hopefully the 2.3, but also it's been 5 months, so there's quite a bit I got to look through to make sure that's true. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. See you next month.
Take care.
Later.